Hey there, this is Heather Van Wild with Raindrop Works. We've got something a little different for you today. Basically, what we're looking at today is there is a ongoing try to get ideas on how to help improve the police department and public safety in the city. And I had mixed feelings on the idea of going there, but I did go to the first public speaking session that they had in this process, which is estimated to take about the next 6 months in downtown Gresham tonight. I will preface this by saying that I certainly do have opinions about the contents and the context of some of the conversations that happened tonight. In light of that, I've decided I'm going to do this video a little differently than previous times that I've done things like this. I'm actually going to do 2 different videos. The first one is going to be this one that you're watching now, which is going to be the essentially unedited version of the video. I'm not going to put any commentary in. I'm just going to leave everything the way it is, except for fixing audio. That way people can see it without my extra input on it. And then in a little while, when I get a chance to do more work on it, I'm going to do a different video where those who want to have my side of it added in, because let's just say I have opinions. And obviously, those who have been following our channel for any length of time know that there is going to be a bit of a bias that will definitely play into a topic like this. So, in the interest of full fairness, I think doing the 2 different videos will be the best way to let both sides have their interpretations able to be visited for this. So, with that being said, the one thing I do want to say is, I didn't entirely have my proper gear out for this. I didn't expect to be actually recording the whole thing like I have some other events, so I didn't bring as much of my stuff. I screwed up with the gimbal a little bit. There were a few times when I hit the wrong command and the camera goes a little wild. I apologize in advance for that. I will try to do something to warn about that if I can figure out a good way to do that. But yeah, that's where we're looking at for this video here. Stay tuned on the channel. And later on, we'll have the second video come out that will have my input with, clarifications and commentary and things like that. So
I need to get started because we've got people waiting outside, and obviously we hit capacity. So first of all, just thank you everyone for showing up. For those that don't know me, I am your Chief of Police, Travis Goldberg, for the city of Gresham. And so really thank you for being here. We value your input and feedback, especially not only all the time, but we're going through a process right now of a comprehensive assessment and evaluation of everything we do as a police department. And so it's really critical to have you provide some engagement around that process. Tonight, represented here are members from BerryDunn Associates. And I'm a little bit spinning right now because we've hit capacity here. We had an idea for overflow. That's not worked out necessarily. I have people out there waiting to hear from me as the Chief of Police on what to do next. There are going to be other opportunities to be heard. So they'll talk a little bit about that. I can tell you that there's a way you can do that right now. There's a social pinpoint, which basically is a website that you can go to and provide information and input and get some questions around what's going on with the assessment and where we're headed. And then we also have a virtual forum that we're going to be planning after the first of the year. Do you want me to individually introduce you or just go? You guys are good. All right, well, thank you very much. Please, we value your input.
I don't get to do this very often. Hey, Chief, get out.
Okay, thank
I don't get to get police chief orders very often, so. Well, first of all, I'm just echo what the chief said. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So, my name is Michelle Lanzo, and I am a manager for BerryDunn. We're a East Coast-based consulting firm, national firm. And we've been hired by the city to do an operations and management assessment of the police department. And you might say, well, what is that? Well, let's put it this way. If it has to do with the police department, we're going to study it. Everything from communication to leadership to staffing to how patrols are scheduled to caseloads, policies, training, everything you can imagine that would relate to policing, including community engagement, a whole bunch of other stuff which I won't bore you with. We're going to study that. And that process takes about 6 to 7 months from beginning to end. We're about a month and a half in at this point. And we use a variety of different ways to do that and to complete that study. Certainly, one of the things that's really, really important to us in terms of the way we conduct this work is engaging with stakeholders and community members and the folks that are part of receiving public safety services within the community. I have a couple of colleagues here. I'm just going to, let me give you a quick background on me. I spent 27 years in policing. I was a police chief for 17 years in 3 departments in Minnesota. And after finishing that up, I taught at St. Cloud State University for about a year. And then I went to work for an organization called the International Association of Chiefs of Police. It's the largest law enforcement association in the world. And I did these kind of studies for them for about 3 years. And I left that firm and have been with BerryDunn for about 3.5 years doing really the same kind of work. My 2 colleagues here, I'm going to just introduce them and save them have to go through it themselves. Immediately to my left is Fred Fletcher. Fred is a former commander from the Austin, Texas Police Department. He also is, as he refers to himself, a recovering police chief, was a police chief in a couple of different places, including Chattanooga, Tennessee. And Fred and I have been doing a lot of this work over the last 4 or 5 years together. We've done a number of these studies and collaborated on them. And to his left is Michael Kersley, who is the police chief, currently the police chief in Albany, Georgia, the other Albany. And Mike was a recipient of a project that we did there about a year ago. And we invited him to come on board with us and help us because, quite frankly, he's got a lot of great ideas. And it's been really valuable and has been through the process. Fred also was the recipient of a study like this when he came into Chattanooga, actually done by my predecessor at IACP. So, again, that's just a little bit of background on this type of work. I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do tonight, kind of what the goal is and what we're trying to accomplish. A number of you have asked these questions. This is a public forum. It's an input forum. Okay, so it's not about me talking to you or giving you a presentation or telling you anything other than kind of a little bit of background. As soon as I get done talking, we're going to ask people if you have comments that you want to make. We are not going to do a sign-up. I think we have a small enough group, and unfortunately, as the chief mentioned, we were trying to figure out, do we need another site? We had another site set up. It was 5 minutes to 6. We're like, I think we're good. And then we closed the other site down, and lo and behold, we had about 20 people show up. So it's unfortunate. But as he mentioned, there are some different ways that you can contribute. And by the way, beyond even tonight. So there is a social pinpoint website. You can find that linked through the city website. And what that is basically it's an individual website just for this project. And you'll find a whole bunch of information there. If you haven't already visited, you can ask a question about the project. You can provide feedback about the police department. And there's also a list of the various activities that are going to be going on. And we will also have, you'll also find like the project work plan and schedule there. So if you want to see what are we going to do, that's detailed there. And we will also post monthly reports out to that site. We've had really great activity on the site already. I just checked it this afternoon. There's been about 110 comments left on the site. You will not see those comments because those comments, they go into a super top secret vault. Okay. What we do is we take all of that information. It's not about sharing individual Clients, we're really looking for patterns and process areas and issues that we want to bring forward in advance to the city in terms of how to improve public safety services for the community. There's going to be comments that say, gee, you're not doing this really well. That's important. We need to know that. There's other comments that say, gee, we really like this. That's important as well. What you will see there's a Q&A section, and when questions are posed, they come in, we will review the questions, police department will provide a response, and we'll put that back on the site. So you will see some of those out there. But again, I would encourage you to go visit that. As the chief mentioned, there will be an open forum, a virtual open forum, that's going to be happening on January 5th at 8 o'clock. And I'm sorry, not 8 o'clock, 6 o'clock. January 5th, 6 o'clock. It will be, on the Social Pinpoint site, there will be a link to that video open forum. So again, you're welcome to join that at that time. If there's other people that weren't able to make it to this meeting and you want to ask them to join that, you can just make them aware of that link as well. Okay. I want to just talk a little bit about how we're going to do this, kind of run the rest of the evening here. First of all, how many of you have ever read the magazine Outdoor Life? Do you remember this? Right? And in the middle of that magazine, there's always a page that says, "This happened to me." You guys remember that? That's not what we're doing here, okay? People's experiences are really important, and we do want to hear about your experiences, but what we're really looking for are processes, right? It's not about all the details of everything that happened to you, it's about how do we process what good happened or what we need to think about improving. So we're definitely interested in hearing from any or all of you that wish to comment. We're set to go till 8 o'clock. I suspect we'll get through everybody's comments by then. If not, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So with that said, what we're going to do, again, from my perspective, just a couple of ground rules. We want to be respectful of everyone. This should be a safe space for people to share their thoughts, views, comments, etc. But of course, we want to exercise a little decorum in the way that we do that. So I'm going to ask each and every one of you that want to speak to please frame your comments in a way that hopefully is not offensive to others, to the extent that you're able. A couple of other things. This is not a debate. So if one person makes a comment about X, it's not for someone else to stand up and say, well, I disagree with so-and-so, and here's my perspective. That's not what we're doing, okay? There's plenty of opportunities for that in some other forum, and this isn't it, okay? So we do want to hear from each and every one that wants to contribute. So, please just kind of keep those things in mind. We do not have an artificial time limit set for how long people can talk, okay? So I will ask you cordially, if someone's up and talking, let's not interrupt them, let's let them finish their thought. If anyone is going to be the arbiter of how long someone should talk, it will be me, okay? If it looks like they're taking up too much airtime, we'll ask them to have a seat. I will certainly circle back to them for additional thoughts if we have time and if that allows. How are we doing so far? Any questions from anybody about the process? Yes.
So one of the city staff is asking if you had your opportunity to give input, would you be willing to leave and give up your seat? So there's about 20 people who would like to be able to come in and they're willing to wait. If when you had your opportunity to talk, you would give up the seat. So I can let them know that if that's agreeable.
Does anybody want to just run out the door right now?
There's almost 10 seats available.
Well, so listen, before we go further, here's the thing. There is an occupancy capacity to this space, which has been carefully calculated by the fire marshal or some other person of authority, and we are at it. It's because we have a number of people standing. Yes, it's true there's chairs, but unfortunately the number of people is the driving force, not the number of chairs. So I hear you, and quite frankly, in a perfect world, everybody would be in here and we'd proceed that way, but obviously we're constrained by what we're constrained by. Okay. So, the way we're going to do this is certainly just by show of hands, if somebody wants to make a comment, we will ask you to stand up and make your comment. And I'm hoping that we can just, I think the venue is probably small enough here that we can just have folks, just without having to run around with a microphone, I think we can just have folks give their comment. And we're going to try that at least to start and see how that works. So, are there any brave souls that want to start?
I just want to know, do you give comments, or like, do we just, how does it work? Do you give us a topic, do you talk about something, or do we just get up there?
That's a good question. She's asking, do we kind of get you guys started, give you questions, that kind of thing? Yep, we're going to do that. Here it is. You ready? What do you want to tell me about the Gresham Police Department? That's all you get, okay? And honestly, it's on purpose. But I want to just say this real quickly before we go on. It's not my job to try to pigeonhole anybody down the lane or say, tell me about X or tell me about Y or tell me about Z. We just want to know, what do you think? What's important to you? What are the things that, as I said, what are the things that you like that the department does? What are the things that that you maybe think they should change or do differently or that they could improve on? That's really the substance of it. And other than that, I think everybody is capable of stringing together those thoughts, so we're just going to leave it at that and let folks talk. And in some, in all likelihood, some of the conversation will track with some of the other comments, and that's okay. But again, just keep in mind, let's just be respectful to each other. This really is about collaboration and bringing the community together to have. I guess I'll just say this one last thing. I keep saying one last thing. There's one last thing. We are firm believers that the community should have an influential voice over the policing services that affect it. And so, that's not just about this meeting. Okay? It's a philosophy about what policing ought to look like from a best practices standpoint. So it's not simply just having a meeting or even two meetings. It's about how do we engage the public in a way that provides them not only with a voice that we hear, but that actually influences the decisions about public safety long term. Okay? So I've got a couple of hands that I saw. I'm going to start with this gentleman right here, and I'll let you go ahead.
You want names?
No, you don't.
That's fine.
It's up to you if you want to share your name, but we're not asking for them. We're not writing them down.
No, I don't speak very loud, so I'll get up here. My question is concerning the neighborhood enforcement team, which has been basically gutted. We were told that because we're losing officers for this reason or that reason, that they thought that this was the best way to do it. I live in an area which is low income. We have had great response from the neighborhood enforcement team, and to see this go away is going to be a big hardship for a lot of low income neighborhoods. It may not be in all of the areas of Gresham, but North Gresham, Rockwood, this is an important feature. And I understand that there's not enough officers to do this and that and everything. So how do we get this back? What do we need to do? I mean, do we need to put out more money to get officers to come in so we can refund these programs?
So that's a great question and a great point. And I'm hoping, is there anybody that couldn't hear what he was talking about? Okay, great. So let me just say this. One of the main objectives of this study is to quantify the number of personnel the police department should have. Okay? That includes the number that should be in patrol, the number that should be in investigations, the number that should be in support services, the number that should be in of non-sworn staff as well as sworn officers, and it involves looking at all the various services that the police department provides. there are, I haven't counted, but there's probably 30 or 40 different specialty units that the police department has. And, when we sit down with an iPad and we say, well, let's rate all these about importance, right? What do we, we're not going to not, we don't really make any headway, right? What I will tell you is, from a best practices standpoint, philosophically, the backbone of your organization is your patrol function. That's where it starts. After that is investigations, and after that is everything else. Okay? So when we look at these projects and we make recommendations to organizations, I won't speak directly to the neighborhood enforcement team here, but here's what I will say. In organizations where we find that they have a significant shortage of patrol personnel and or investigative personnel, we commonly recommend that they redirect resources to those primary services until such time as they can backfill and get people in those other roles. So I will tell you that it's not up to us when or if the neighborhood enforcement team gets reinstated. We've heard that they do good things like a lot of the other units. But there is at least, and I will tell you, we do not have, so far, we do not have the data that tells us what the workload volumes are, what that translates into in terms of numbers of staff that are required. But there's certainly anecdotal evidence from a lot of different corners suggesting that the department needs more personnel. And so as those things come into clarity, and we're able to provide that information back to the city and back to the police department, we certainly would expect that we will look at those things and prioritize when new staff are available, prioritize putting those back into places where they're most needed.
Do we have a say in where those priorities are? That's a big issue because, this was just all of a sudden no more neighborhood enforcement. And it was like, shouldn't you have asked somebody out here how they're doing and what they're doing, this kind of thing, before you just, cut things off?
It's a good question. And at the end of the day, really how the police department ends up determining how to allocate resources, that occurs through, and should occur through a wide lens, right? To discern what makes the most sense in terms of deploying personnel. Certainly, as I just got done saying, the community ought to have a voice in some of these decisions, an influential voice in some of these decisions. So it certainly stands to reason that the police department ought to be thinking about ways in which folks can weigh in and provide feedback on some of those pieces. Okay? And somebody asked me, are there any members of the city council in the audience tonight? Okay, one. Anyone else? Okay. Somebody just asked, I don't know if that's really relevant, but thanks for being here. And I think this woman back here was next.
Thank you. My name is Shar Giar, and I live over by Centennial High School. I was asked to come tonight from a detective in the police department in Gresham, who also was a gang enforcement officer, and we worked together for the last 5 years on a real troubled house next to mine. Before those 5 years, I lived in a very nice, quiet neighborhood. The neighbor next door has a number of businesses, some of them very illegal. According to the officer, there was an arsenal of guns. There was drugs being brought in and then taken out wholesale and sold around town. There were women coming in and being delivered for escort service. And this went on 24/7, and I don't mean just a few days a week. It went on all the time. And I had great cooperation. I loved the gentleman that I worked with. He called me, he said, I understand you live next to this bad house. I said, yeah, I do. And we would meet at Centennial High School at midnight, and I would give him pictures, license numbers, whatever I could. June was the last incident in my neighborhood, and it was a pretty bad one. The neighbor next door was zip-tied to a chair, pistol whipped in his home, his Corvette, his Challenger, all of the guns, about $250,000 that he had in cash in the house, and all the drugs were taken. It was 5 or 6 trucks full of 15 people that just rampaged it. The police came out then, but they told him and they told us it was self-induced, it was his fault, and they didn't have enough resources to work on it. The next 3 nights, that house was broken into again. And each time we called the police, and they never came out. The 4th night, there was an attempt to break in the 4th time and do more damage. The neighbor on the other side brought out his handgun and his phone and screamed at them and said, if you don't get the blank off this property, I will shoot every one of you, and I think he would have. We are up to here with this process. We have been, it's been going on for 5 years. So then, the owner moved out, the house is vacant, I have to be a real estate agent. I hate him, but he called me and said, would you put the house on the market? And I said, oh yeah, sure. So I figured nobody else could handle that house with the history it has except for me. Mid-October, we put the house on the market, put a sign up. The next 2 nights, the house was vandalized, broken into, windows broken, walls, holes in walls. I removed the sign. I left it on the market. We called the police both nights. Didn't have enough resources to come out and help us. Hopefully, in the next month or so, we will have a sale, we'll get normal people in there, everything will be fine. Our frustration is, had they come out that second night after the original incident in June, the neighbor has video of all of the people, very clear. We know they're people that the neighbor screwed over. But had they come out, maybe they could have taken some of them off the street. Maybe they could have kept the arsenal of guns and the drugs and all that other stuff in the house from getting out into the community. And that's our frustration. And that's what I've said to the detectives. We're citizens too. You might not like him, he's an asshole, but we're citizens. We need the protection. We have been terrified that someone will come and blow up that house. So all I'm saying is that when the resources are available, when the number of officers can be increased, please answer these kinds of calls. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I think everybody in this room knows that the police department is understaffed. I don't think that's a secret. They can't respond to what they need to. Even if a police officer is hired today, it would take almost a year and a half to get them trained and be out on the street. So number one, we've got a funding problem. Number two, are they being adequately paid? Or are they going someplace else that's paying more? So they really need to look at that also. Now, I'm all for parks, okay? I love parks, and I think everybody does. But are they putting money into parks, not into law enforcement, and the park's not safe? If you take a look in recent history, where are a lot of the shootings taking place? They're taking place in parks. If we don't have law enforcement to cover that, what good is it? Okay, response time. It's going to be more than just Gresham. An officer can arrest somebody, take them downtown to jail, and they're out on the street before the officer gets back here. That's part of the problem systemically here. And then is the district attorney and the prosecutor. That is also a problem. So it's more than just Gresham, but we need these officers on the street to make the street safe for all of us. Just take a little bit
So one question is, when you look at wanting to do a study for the police, you kind of say, well, gee, maybe there is something wrong.
And I think the city of Gresham was one of the only departments in the state to have been reviewed by the Justice Department and found no problems whatsoever. So as a citizen, I'm glad to hear you say that it might be looking at what our staffing should be, because otherwise it looks like something's wrong and we need to fix it. I want to say it is an education piece, knowing that officers should be 2 officers per 1,000, and we're at 112 because we're losing them.
I'm going to pause you there for a second, just so we're clear on this. We do not recommend using a per 1,000 ratio as a metric, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I'll give you a very quick narrative, and I'll let you speak again. But let's assume that we have a community of 100,000 people with the median age of 65, right? And the median home value is $225,000, and the median income is $80,000. That community is going to have very different law enforcement needs than a community with a median age of 28, right? And what's the level of poverty in Albany, Michael?
40%.
How much?
40% of the population.
40% poverty. That community is going to require substantially more resources. So just so we're clear, it is not an industry standard to use per 1,000 ratios to discuss staffing needs. Instead, we look at volume, and we look at capacity, and we look at crime type, and we look at all of these, and we look at ability to respond and the geography. So there's many factors, but I just want to, and I don't hope I'm not admonishing you, I just want to make sure everybody understands that's not the measure. It really is about what's the workload and our ability to respond to it.
And so let me rephrase, because the numbers don't matter. When you said we are going to determine whether or not we need more officers, and you heard the child in the audience, it was because all of us, especially with Shar saying they can't respond. And my biggest concern is twofold. One is that most citizens who aren't educated about the lack of staffing that we have and the people that are leaving, the officers that are leaving, they say that the police officers don't care to respond. That couldn't be farther from the truth. They cannot respond, and it's killing them. I want to elevate this conversation not to the police department, because that's where the whole focus is. Because of the nationwide issues, which are not here in Gresham, it's always the police department, the chief, the police department. I want to elevate it to our policymakers. Right. They're the ones that decide the funding, and Gresham is woefully inadequate in terms of funding. We always will be because of Measure 5, and because, we are the lowest per capita employees in the state, one of the lowest. And so, from citizens, I think we want to say we need the support. The officers need to feel supported by the policymakers, or we're going to
have a couple of responses to that. One, first of all, this will be a public document. Everyone will get to read it. I should say, everyone will have a chance to read it, but you may not want to. It will be rather lengthy. And I get to write it, so I know how long it is. We have every indication that city leadership is eager to see the results of this and eager to respond in ways that they are able. So, we have already met with the mayor. We will be meeting with other folks. We've met with the city manager. So just so we're clear, this is a study about the police department, but obviously the recommendations that will come out of this report will get advanced to the city, and they will be available to the community to read. I also want to just mention quickly, it's common for these reports to generate between 40 and 50 recommendations. That doesn't mean your police department's broken. I'm sure all of you, in whatever your professional field is, if someone were to come in who knows your industry well and look at what you do, they could easily come up with a number of areas where you could do better. And I also want to say that, as far as our engagement with the city, this is about helping them improve. It's not about trying to find something wrong or try to point the finger in any particular direction. So, okay, and
I'm sorry, I may have missed it in the interrupt when you introduced yourself, so I apologize.
It's okay.
Could you give us a little deeper understanding of who hired you and who you are accountable to and
Sure.
that whole process?
Sure. So if you're not familiar with the process, generally procurement rules for cities, states require that after a certain dollar threshold, they have to do a formal request for proposals, put that out and allow firms to respond to that. So in this case, there was a proposal that went out. My firm created a proposal that we sent back to the city and said, here's the work that we feel that you've described, here's what we would do to satisfy that work, here's what we would charge you to do that work, and we then went through an interview, and then, it's true, right? And then, once that information is received, then the city goes through an evaluative process on their own. We were one of a handful of vendors that interviewed as part of the process, and ultimately our firm was selected. We are obviously accountable to the city who's engaged us to produce a deliverable or a set of deliverables that meet what we said we were going to do. So here, as part of our process, and if you go on the website, on the Central Pinpoint site, you will see our work plan schedule, and within that it explains what we're going to do, and explains what the deliverables are that we're going to give to the city. And at each interval when we produce a deliverable, the city has to look at it and say, yep, we agree, this meets the objectives that we agreed to, and they have to sign off on it. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what will happen with the full report.
When you say the city, what does that mean? Does that mean the mayor's office? Does that mean the city council? Can you give me kind of a...
Sure. Normally the person who gives final approval on the deliverables is usually like the city manager, whoever the city designates as the project lead. So typically in this case, it would be the city manager. So that would be the person that would ultimately say, yep, we feel that you should have your professional obligations to us.
Can we ask how much you charge? Is that public record?
It is public record. I believe the total cost of the study, put me on the spot, I think it's about $96,000.
So there goes almost a 1.5 officers on behalf of our city. But thank you.
Actually, if I could step in, it's on behalf, it was direction from, I'm Councilor Jones Dixon, it was direction from City Council and staff. We as a council and as a staff feel as though it's necessary to do an assessment in order to know which direction to go in. That's why we hired them, and we want to hear from the community, so we're extremely intentional. And so I just wanted to throw that out there. It is a lot of money.
Where are the other councilors?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm here though.
This gentleman back here.
Oh, sorry. I just want to clarify.
Oh, Ed Sue's here too.
I just want to clarify real quick. This is the only in-person meeting for this process?
At this point, this is the only scheduled in-person meeting. As I said, there will be an open forum also for scheduled on the 5th.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Oh, this gentleman, right?
I appreciate the placing on light rail, and I think we need more. So my wife will feel safe getting on light rail and going places. Also, Springwater Trail. Really appreciate the placing Gresham does. And then I stop when we get to about 162nd. That's patrol, not patrol by court. Third thing I'd like us to look into is merging a couple of the other police departments we have. Are we redundant? Should Multnomah County Police Department merge with Gresham or Gresham with Multnomah County? Get more funding?
Thank you.
I just have a question. I know that the community was told when we were discussing the federal funds, the rescue funds, and I know that we identified public safety as being our #1 priority. And you've told us this evening, and I've also heard it on the recent council meeting, that the city is very much in support of our police, which not exactly. Well, I guess my question is, have the police themselves been told to tell us how they feel about the appreciation that they're shown, the support they're shown from the community, from the city, and because I know that we are scheduled to lose, I believe it's 5 or 7 more before the end of the year for a variety of different reasons. I'd love to know how they feel about what's going on.
That's a great question, and let me give you a couple of pieces to that. So part of our process involves conducting individual interviews and group interviews throughout the department. We were here 2 weeks ago and did a bunch of interviews. We're here most of this week doing the same thing. I think in total we're going to do 40 to 50 in-person interviews between the 2 weeks ago and this week. We will also do some virtual interviews, kind of some follow-up things and so forth. Part of our process, just inherently, not because of being here or in any other place, it inherently includes asking staff about their thoughts about the organization and how they feel. Do they feel valued and those types of things. We also use a culture and climate survey as a part of our process, and that has already been disseminated to staff, and those results have already come back to us. And I'm trying to remember what the number of responses were. I think it was 100. Was it? Yeah, I think it was somewhere around in the upper 80s of people internal at the police department filled out the survey. It's rather lengthy, but it doesn't take that long. It takes about 20 minutes, but it's about 80 questions. So there's a lot of information in there that we use then to support other things that we see or observe throughout the organization, and as part of the furtherance of writing the report and drafting the recommendations of what steps the police department might take next. So, to your point, yes, they have been asked. Yes, we're hearing from them as well, and yes, they have given us information that's been really helpful. Let's just get back here.
I want to amplify that. We are parents of a law enforcement officer, and we have a grandson who's about to become a Portland police officer. And we have been working with the local faith-based community and churches and really talking intimately with them about what they can do to support local law enforcement. And one of the things that we're hearing is you really need to appreciate what you have, because you're always going to need a police officer. And you're down there at a very low threshold. So any way you can think of to appreciate what you have, believe me, they're going home at nights to families. They're facing what Shar described that happens at those, on hour by hour basis these days. And bullets and cars are flying everywhere. So whatever you can do, cookies, talk to one, make a relationship. Our first questions to your local churches have been, what is your relationship with the Gresham Police Department? We found that, and been blessed by some, how very strong. We found others that said, yeah, we thought about that one time, we just sort of let it go and didn't do anything. And there's a number of organizations that can help through that process. But what I'm really telling you is when the day ends, you need police officers. And the ones you have are a precious resource right now. So make sure that you appreciate them. Thank you.
Let me just say that as a third-year professional in the field, I appreciate those comments, because we sometimes forget that our police officers are people too, and they have to go home and put their head on their pillow after sometimes seeing very horrific things. Let's for the moment just dispense with the politics of the world. The job itself, there are some things that police officers have to deal with on a regular basis, and they still go about their lives, and for the most part, nobody even realizes they're carrying those burdens. So I appreciate those comments a lot. And I also want to add that somebody said it before, and I don't know who said it, but there was a question about care. Again, between Mike and Fred and I, we've had conversations. Every single officer that we've encountered so far, we would hire in our own agencies, These are top-notch folks, and I will tell you that in our conversation with them, we have been impressed significantly with a very evident and honest sense of caring that these officers have about their community and about the work they do. So you're fortunate to have good folks that you have, and you're correct. To the extent that you can hang on to them, that's a good thing. And the next step is let's get some more and backfill some spots and that kind of stuff. So good point. I'll get back to you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to stay seated so I can read what I wrote. I am a queer white mother of two who went to school with two friends who joined the police force and a third friend who's a state trooper. I believe the far majority of officers go into the field because they want to create safety and protection for our neighborhoods, and they want to do good in the world. I'm here, though, because I'm particularly concerned for African American and people of color who live in Gresham, who continue to be disproportionate targets of police violence nationwide. I'm speaking here today to better understand what protocols Gresham has in place to ensure the type of egregious police violence that we have seen on national TV never happen here. None of us want that. I believe that we live within a white-dominant culture in Gresham that infiltrates our internal, our interpersonal, institutional, and systemic decision-making. So while I support the notion of having folks who protect us against those who wish harm, I also believe it is our responsibility to create space for the uncomfortable conversations about changing policing culture in particular. I'm concerned about the way that I see the Gresham Police Union write about our private citizens on social media. I have seen them defame and share personal citizens' information with the public, creating safety concerns for our citizens. I'm worried about the police institution's public perception within communities of color. As the one time that there's input for the community in this process, this does not look like a racial representation of Gresham. I would appreciate another opportunity for virtual input so that there's places of safety for us to share our opinions, and specifically people of color. I'm aware that our city underwent an equity survey, including an evaluation of the police department. I read Dr. Manson's full report and the two major concerns that, one, there are some staff, including police, who are resistant to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts and or have negative views of Black, Indigenous, and people of color and other underrepresented groups. And two, that some community leaders and community members have reason to doubt that the city will actually follow through on the transition from being monocultural to being multicultural. And that is what is happening with Gresham's future. I see Mason's recommendation that our future city hires, including police officers, go through an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and implicit bias evaluation. My question is this. I wonder how the city will evaluate existing employees, not just new employees, under the new hiring lens.
Good stuff. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
And so let me just say that part of our job.
I find it disingenuous that you keep saying that it's a setup and that y'all keep snickering.
Can you guys take your hats off?
That shows the racism that we're up
No,
against.
it doesn't.
It does.
Not
It
at
shows
all.
the racism that we're
Not
up
at
against.
Okay, everybody, we're going to be respectful of everybody's discussions, okay? What I will tell you is that part of the process that we go through is evaluating accountability practices within the organization and making sure that they are up to standard and that they are in a position to hold folks accountable. And certainly part of that is the whole concept of impartial policing, social procedural justice, and to your point on DEI and I know there's been a lot of conversation and we've seen some comments and so forth about 21st century policing and DEI and those types of things. We are certainly looking at those pieces of the police department that is part of the report, and there will likely be recommendations that track with those pieces and parts. To the extent that I'm not aware of, certainly in my travels, I'm not aware of any kind of retro assessment of internal personnel about where they sit with regard to multiculturalism or a variety of different things. However, it's not uncommon for us to recommend that agencies take multiple steps to recognize the diversity within their community, and there's a host of different ways that can occur. So, without spending all the time with me talking and explaining all of that, there are pieces and parts of that, and that is a part of the study, and it's very important. So, thank you. Let's see, there was one other, this one.
My name is Mark Eisenhammer. I've lived in this community for over 50 years. Cascade Athletic Club, employed about 250 people. And my main concern is that we fund our police officers and that we find out why they're leaving, that we need to support them. And if we have money on the table, if we have temporary money, if we have one-off money that's available to us, we don't have 6 or 8 months to wait for a study to start taking care of our people. We need to do it now. So any funds that are available that we can prioritize, that city council, that city leadership can prioritize to attract new people back to us. I know that there are a number of agencies in the area that are throwing out very attractive offers to our officers and to our personnel, and we need to do the same. We need to figure out how to fix this problem now. I don't know about whether it's 1 per 1,000 or 2 per 1,000. I do know that if traffic is going away, that if neighborhood enforcement is going away, that if gangs is going away, that we don't have enough officers. So if we're having to prioritize those kinds of things, let's figure out a temporary solution. Let's call on the city leaders right now to fund those things in the temporary. So I think it's great we're doing a study, but 6 or 8 months is too long. Thank you.
Can I respond to that? Yeah.
Let me just say this. So you're right. Can I ask another question?
And is that authorized or not authorized?
Well, I think it's pretty difficult to control in a public setting. We can let you do that, but let me just say this. Just to clarify, we recognize that as a part of these processes, oftentimes communities have an emergent need for certain information and certain steps, and that waiting 6 or 7 months, as you say, really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, okay? So just so you're aware, part of our process is to deliver what we call an emergent issues memo, and we actually have already delivered part 1 of that to the police department. There will be another section of that will be coming at the end of January. And I can tell you that we're already planning conversations with police department staff to talk about issues surrounding recruiting, hiring, and retaining personnel, and also I'm totally drawing a blank. But there are a handful of things that we're going to talk about. We actually have a meeting scheduled for Thursday morning to talk about some of those pieces. And the specific need about, as we've heard from a lot of you, and let me say this. Our goal is to be objective, okay? I don't have data that says you need more police officers. I've certainly heard a lot of information and feedback that leads me to believe that's probably true, but I also want to make sure that the data takes me to a conclusion, not that it's just not something emotional or whatever. So I please don't take that I'm disagreeing with anyone. We're just not in a position to make that statement and say, yep, we can tell you this is what it is. I will say that one of the other pieces, in addition to recruiting, hiring, and retention piece, is talking about how do we infuse personnel into the police department right now as quickly as possible to address some of the very things that you are bringing up. Making sure we have enough people to respond to calls, making sure they get there in a timely manner. So those conversations are occurring and will be occurring in rapid fashion, and to the extent that we're in a position to move some of those initiatives forward sooner than later, we expect that those will be carried forward and available for action by the council. Councilman, did you want to make a comment?
No, I'm sorry. I'm passionate about public safety, so I'll wait. If anybody wants to chat afterwards, I'm just going to sit back and listen.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Gresham used to have an advocate that they would send out for after a domestic violence call, and they've done away with that. And I think that is a critical piece that Gresham needs to bring back, because if they can get a woman and her child or whatever out of that situation, they may not have to go back. Because as we all know, domestic violence calls are very, very dangerous for the officers, and that might basically save some lives.
I don't disagree, and I can tell you that one of Fred's main passions is victim advocacy and victim services. Thank you for your comments. Absolutely, we are looking at the we will look at domestic abuse response protocols and make necessary recommendations around that. So thank you. I'm trying to see if I missed anybody.
This guy right here.
Yes, sir.
Well, I've got a couple comments made. Number one, 3 or 4 weeks ago, they told us that they're going to get rid of the net team and the traffic division. Well, the net team consists of 4 men. And those 4 men, along with code enforcement, have kept our city pretty clean. And if you don't think they've kept it clean, you get on any east-west street and head toward Portland, and you can tell by the dirt and the graffiti and the trash on the street when you cross that city line. So to get rid of that crew, what's going to happen is we're going to become another Portland if they don't reinstate that. I think it's very important that they put that back. Now, I realize we have emergencies, but I'm going to tell you something. That crew will respond to the emergencies. The traffic crew will respond to the emergencies. If it's a bank robber, you're going to find a traffic motorcycle sitting outside that bank. But the thing that is with the traffic crew is the same way. We have speeders in that city that are doing a rate of speed. We clocked one the other day 115 miles an hour inside the city limits. That's outrageous. And that's right past the fire station. So I mean, we need to keep those things. I realize that we have an issue that's beyond this, and that is a budget issue. We've got to get a budget that's dedicated to our police department. But the thing of it is, they're telling us they're going to pull these people back until they can fill those positions. It takes 2 years unless we can hire some of the generals before.
It's too long.
We do have a good police department, we know that. But the thing of it is, unless we can get a lateral transfer, it takes 2 years to get that.
So let me just say that the time it takes to hire a police officer from the point of application until they get on the police department and then go through field training, go through the academy, go through field training, varies greatly. And there are many factors that go into that. One of them here in Oregon is that they have to go through the state academy. And there's only so many academies that are available, okay? So as you say, if you don't bring in laterals, it makes it really difficult to bring in sworn staff, okay? However, having said that, there are plenty of non-sworn roles that can be performed and help provide relief in a variety of settings. I won't go into those in detail, but we definitely look at those. And part of the strategy for trying to infuse personnel quickly into the police department is evaluating how do we do that? Where can we add some people in some way, shape, or form to provide some relief so that our sworn personnel can do the things that we really need them to do specifically?
The other thing that Gresham needs its own court system. We send a person down to Oklahoma County Courthouse and they get back over the street before the officers finish writing statements. If we had our own court system and our own DA, they could prosecute them, and we wouldn't have a guy that was concentrating a ticket for a stolen car, and he finds out he's got 7 other tickets against him, haven't even processed yet. So that's another thing.
Back in the day at the sheriff's office, we used to come, retirees used to come back and work, so why can't Gresham do that?
It's a good question. When can retirees come back? I will tell you that I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not an expert on Oregon law, okay? So, but my understanding is that there are, just like most states have a pension system, right? So when you retire with a state pension, typically there are limits to whether you can come back and for how long and for what capacity. My understanding, and again, I don't know that this is accurate, I haven't looked into this. My understanding is that there is an allowance currently for that, but that there is a legal shift that's going to occur, I believe, in 2024, which will impede the ability of folks to do that. So as I understand it right now, and I don't want to mislead you, but as I understand it, there is the capacity to bring retirees back even in a full-time status, but that will expire in 2024. That's what I have been told. I don't know if that's accurate. But with that said, certainly tapping into the retiree pool is an option and something to consider and talk about, for sure. Yes, sir.
We'll just go quick. Hey, I'm supposed to be here, 30 years of law enforcement retired, thank you. And however, Portland, in 2007, their employees went into PERS. Prior to 2007, they're part of police fire disability. They can work full-time until they're 80 years old. Anybody in PERS can only work 1,000 hours a year. That's why Portland can do a rehire program.
We can get some back for the duration.
They are only limited for 2 years in their current position if they're above the salary. They can work 6 years as a patrol officer if that's what their job was before. So they're limited in the amount of time they can come back, but that's because they're in a different pension system altogether than PERS.
We could still get some.
Okay, which is not to say that's not to pour water on that notion. I mean, it may very well be something that can be used as a stopgap along the way. So certainly something to consider.
What I agree, community safety officer program would be huge for the city of Gresham because you can hire non-smart personnel at about a third of the pay, and they can go out and the net officers that were going out the low-level crimes. This community safety officers can be a part of that program. They can respond to those low-level crimes. They don't require an armed officer to come out to your neighborhood and tow the cars or ticket the cars or do any of that. And that's really, really important for the livability aspect in the city of Gresham. So that would be one of my recommendations. If they can't get that back, I certainly understand staffing issues. I work out as a finance, so I understand all that. However, again, I want to keep this forward that this is to talk about policy changes in the city, not necessarily, come in and gripe about we're low with officers. Everybody is low. Nobody has enough officers. It's going to be a really, really long time before anybody probably gets up to full staffing. That's just the way it is.
Thank you.
I'll leave.
Excuse me. He had a question, or he wanted to make a comment 10 minutes ago.
I'll be quick.
Okay.
So I'm from Portland. I'm on one of the seats there, a chair. One of the things I was going to ask or recommend was to bring back I don't know if they have it here, the reserve officer program, but also make sure it's diversified. Because I know a lot of people are talking about Portland. Gresham is going to slightly go that way. It's just how life goes. But if you don't bring in a reserve program, you can't fill those seats fast enough.
Yep.
So,
and that's kind of what he was talking about with the community safety officer program. If you're not familiar with that, you might see this in other communities where there's uniformed personnel. They usually have a different color uniform and they don't carry a firearm. They're not sworn officers, but they oftentimes do a lot of different things. Things like writing parking tickets or responding to animal calls or any variety of different things. So
this is different. These would be fully armed officers. Guys would have their own gear. Portland used to have it. Problem is, you gotta, like the young lady said in the back, you gotta make sure you have an equity and inclusion plan. If you don't have that, you just kind of rinse and repeat. And you also gotta address the houseless homeless program. So what you see, everyone sees in Portland, you will gradually see that here. The gang problem, same thing. So that's one of the things, but you also, instead of everything in the city, you've got to do some with social services, education, those things you've got to work on, because the police is one small part of the puzzle. As you know, we can work all night, it's not going to change. So you got to have all these intricate pieces to help the community.
I agree. That's great.
One of the things that I'm wondering is when we talk about supporting the police department and freeing up officers to do the things that only they can do. I know that we have a cadet program in the Gresham Police Department. We also have a citizen volunteer and policing department, the CVIPs. That is a volunteer department that are mostly older people, to my understanding anyway. I don't think that it is very robustly publicized perhaps, or has a huge number of active volunteers because of the COVID period of time that we've had. But I'm wondering what more vigorous role could they play in helping the police department in terms of parking tickets, in terms of some of the animal calls, and some of the things that don't require a police presence. It seems like now, just in the patrolling, certainly perhaps some of the neighborhood enforcement information in terms of things that may need towed or those kinds of things could fall to them. But I think it needs to be done in a more systematic manner, and perhaps we need to let more people know in the community that this opportunity is available, so that we do have a more diversified volunteer force. We've got younger people, we've got people from all of the different sections and segments of our community that want to volunteer and help out the police and be part of that effort. But I don't really see that going on now, and I think there's a huge opportunity to support the police in doing some of those things.
You're right, and all of those things that you described are part of that conversation. And just, I think I said this before, but just to be clear, part of our goal is to look at what is it that your police officers are doing? Are there things they don't need to do that we could offload to other personnel, which again, then starts to create more capacity for those officers? Some of you have mentioned this before, but you know, we got to the point, and I say we, the industry got to the point where, you know, the police were kind of the solution to everybody because they're the 24/7 available resource that can go out and respond to these things. And that doesn't necessarily mean that everything they were going to required a police officer to be there. So part of our analysis is looking at that and helping the organization understand where could we shift some of these roles and responsibilities internally. Again, we're talking about, you know, whatever that time frame is to get officers in. Well, listen, if we can get non-sworn people, we can hire them really fast, right? We don't have to wait 18 months or 2 years or whatever that interval is. So to the extent that we can help identify those pieces of the workflow that we can shift around, that's one solution that we can use, that we can start with and move rather quickly, okay? So, yes, sir.
My name is Ryan Victor. I'm a small business owner, and I've got 2 little girls living in the community. I agree with a lot of what the guy in Portland says. One thing, though, I didn't agree with is that we're going to become Portland. And I feel like a lot of my friends and neighbors despise what Portland has become. It used to be a beautiful city, and now it's just trash. There's homeless everywhere. And it's almost as though Portland has undergone this experiment for the last 1.5 years where cops are bad and people setting the city on fire and breaking windows are okay, and that's allowed. I want to emphasize to our leadership that we don't want to mimic Portland. We want strong leadership where I think Portland has weak leadership, and they're letting the criminals rule the roost. They're up on crime in every facet that I'm aware of. So if we could focus on not mimicking Portland and being Gresham, a safe, fair, equitable city to all, but not Portland, because I don't think they're doing a good job to their citizens.
I just think accountability is a big thing too, you know,
police officers are doing their best with what resources they have to do it with. But I just think that they go out, risk their life every night, and they arrest people, put them in jail. They're down out on the streets the next day. So it's gotta be a morale problem too. You know, it's gotta be hard on them.
That's a challenging piece, and, you know, I can just tell you as a law enforcement executive, what I told my folks was, the way the law is structured, your job is to catch them and put them where they're supposed to go, and after that, what happens, that's not on you. Now, there might be other, you know, we could have a lot bigger discussion about how society deals with some of those folks, probably a little bit beyond the scope of this project, but I don't necessarily disagree with you either. So, yes, sir.
You know, I guess along with, even with the gentleman's talking about, one of the things I think has been a good model progression is our houseless homeless team. We have a team that is very responsive. We live in the downtown core, and we many times see homeless in the area, and the team is very compassionate. They're helping with services, but also helping them to find places to go. We have a very stringent RV policy in this direction. So I guess I'll say that I just want to commend the city. And it's a good example of combining of non-sworn officers. We have a team of civilians along with two officers that are part of this team. And they're very active, very responsive. So I think some of these other policing areas, we see a good combination of civilian and sworn officers just doing an outstanding job. We live near the Springwater Trail, and we have the best part of the Springwater Trail in the county.
Did you have a comment? Yes.
Yes, I did. I would like to say how much I have appreciated the net team and all of the, what is the one that does they go to the houses, and if there's a
Code compliance.
code enforcement, yes. Okay, so it's the officers, the code enforcement, and as this gentleman said, the officer's name is Kevin, but they have a team that they will go out and give gift cards to people, the homeless people, and they help in that way. And I had read somewhere, I'm not sure where, but it talked about in one of the Gresham papers or one of my Gresham site about hiring non-officer staff to help, and like counselors or certified recovery mentors or peer mentors, and we've had that in place with these services that we have. And I've been to a couple of net meetings, and they explained SEPTED to us too, which was very, very, important and interesting about how landscaping, how you landscape and how you have your bushes and everything, how that helps in safety. And I wanted to say that I appreciate the net team too, like other people have, and that if we could enlarge that with non-officers, sorry.
Non-sworn.
Yeah, non-sworn, and that have conflict, like if you're gonna go write parking tickets, you need to have conflict resolution skills. And I know those trainings used to be available at the city, and, and CPR, all those things. If we're trained, if people are trained and can go out and do these things, we can support the officers because they need support. And we need help out there. I was involved in 2 incidents recently that scared me, and I couldn't even leave my house for a week. I had at the Dollar Tree, there was some people that parking lot raged at me, and they were trying to have a conflict, and it scared me, and I froze, and then they threw a glass of ice at my granddaughters in the back seat, and I couldn't move, and I tried calling 911. Couldn't get through, and I was really scared. And then another one was a dog attack. A dog that was off leash attacked my daughter's dog. She was walking them on leash, and she fell down. The dog
got bloody anyway. So I had interaction with my neighbors, which isn't that great. But it took 3-4 days to get any response with that too. And so they need help with all these different things that we could be doing with, getting cars towed. And the other thing is the My Gresham app is so wonderful. And I started, after the net team meetings, I started taking pictures of a graffiti that I would see, and then you post it on My Gresham, and then whoever is supposed to take care of it, the business or the house owner, the owner has to do it. But the city of Gresham has someone that goes to tell them that. And so that's been really effective, and I've been on the neighborhood, what's the community, the green little button? Next door. Thank you. I know. And I've been posting things about My Gresham and how to do this, and people are commenting about their cats or dogs or their cars or garbage. And so I think that communication between everyone is also key, because a lot of people don't even know about all of these things that we can be doing to support as neighborhoods, as communities, and involving the neighborhood associations and helping them do these things at a volunteer basis.
Can I just say that I love that she didn't know what to say, she's like the little green button, and everybody's like, it's the next door.
She's had her hand up since the beginning. I don't think you can see her,
I'm
so
sorry.
at some
I did
point.
see your hand before too. I'll come to you in just a second. Yes, ma'am.
Which one? Okay. Mine's kind of specific like hers.
It's not equitable.
I'm a single female homeowner, senior citizen. I live next door to a neighbor from hell. He threatened to kill me twice. 2 weeks ago, he attacked my yard surface, threatened to get a gun, his gun, and shoot him. Police would not come out. They called me on the phone and asked if I had seen him with a gun. I said yes, and he's a felon. And they said, well, how do you know it's a real gun? I have a real gun. I know what one looks like. And I keep it beside me now because of him. And because I can't get a response from the police. I feel like I've been dismissed. And I talked to 2 other officers. They referred me to code enforcement. Why? I don't know. And also to arbitration, which doesn't happen with this guy. So that's what I would do. Senior citizens get the same response, like you said. She couldn't even get the cops out there during the emergency.
I'll talk to her, then I'll come back to you. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I've heard a lot tonight about losing officers, and I think that's a huge, across the country, we have a workforce shortage in all industries, not just our policing. But I want to talk about retention and ask the questions about retention. We put huge tax dollars money into each of our officers, and thank you for all of you that are here tonight and the work that you do for us on a regular basis. Lifelong resident of Gresham, and I just thank you, respect everything that you do. And I just want to know what we can do to rebuild the trust between our council and our city leaders, with our GPOA association members, our police officers, our non-sworn members of the department, so we can rebuild that retention. How do we keep them? How do we keep our investment that we put in each of you? We don't want those other cities now getting those officers, because many of them aren't leaving the force, leaving the work. They're leaving the city, and that just saddens me. Having previously been a recruiter for the department, it saddens me because I know the energy and effort that went into bringing you here. But right now, if we Google the City of Gresham Police Department, it's not pretty. And it's not because you aren't doing amazing work. You just said the people you've worked with so far are amazing, and I would agree with that. And do we have some circumstances that aren't great? Yes, it's going to happen. Everyone's human. But what can we do to rebuild that trust so we can? Who's going to come? Who wants to come work for us right now? Who wants to come work in the city when you Google horrible things that aren't necessarily associated with our police department? It's being portrayed as our city, and it's not necessarily our city. So I would just love to ask that question of what we do to rebuild that trust and rebuild the Gresham brand as to who we really are and who we want to be.
Well, the answer to your question is we vote out city council people that aren't supportive of our police force.
There's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle here to unpack. First of all, let me just say that retention of officers is kind of, there are some specific strategies that can be involved in that. So that's one piece. There's another piece about why are people, what is that? And understanding that, not only from historical perspectives, current perspectives, or even going forward, is important. It's an important piece of the retention piece. And as I've said before, we've certainly had indications from city leaders that there is support for the police department. And I understand that not everybody shares that same perspective. Having said that, you're right. Part of the issue is building the right trust between, and rebuilding, if there are folks that don't have that level of trust with city leadership, helping them understand how to rebuild those pieces and create that better connection. So those are all pieces of what we're looking at and things that we will offer to the city and to the police department to work on and try to advance. So thank you for that. And I know you've been waiting, so sorry about that, sir.
Yeah, I just got one thing to say, and then my fiance was actually going to that statement. I come from a community. I'm not going to take my mask off. I come from a community that is impacted by gun violence. I myself have also been impacted by gun violence. I've had friends that's been murdered. I've had cousins that's been murdered. In August, I had 3 friends who actually lost their sons to gun violence. So when we're actually talking about things that are impacting our community, the only thing that I'm not hearing is the root causes of those actual issues. When I was growing up in Portland as a youngster, the things that actually kept me off the streets and kept me out of gangs, we no longer have. We no longer have those organizations that can mentor our youth. We no longer have the actual money that can be able to go towards those organizations that can be supportive to our youth. I had midnight basketball. I had Prospective Gents. Things that actually kept me off the streets at night and gave me actual resources and people that I could actually rely on. So when we're talking about issues that's impacting us, whether it's gun violence or whether it's houselessness, we need to talk about the root causes of it. We need to look for upstream type of solutions. We need to make sure that I understand also as a black man in this environment, in this space, where not a lot of people in this room actually look like me, that there's policies and stuff that actually get put into place that profile people like me. And historically, that has been an issue here in Oregon, whether we're talking about Portland or whether we're talking about Gresham. So when we're talking about these issues, we need to look for upstream type of solutions. We need to look at the root causes of these actual things that are actually in place to actually be able to mitigate the things that's happening right now to us on the streets. My fiance wanted to say a statement too.
All right, thank you, everyone. One of the things that I've been hearing and just kind of been watching as other folks have been speaking is coming together like as a community. And being here and not seeing many folks that look like me can be intimidating and scary and uncomfortable. And when you hear something that someone may disagree with, that also is very troublesome, and it can be hurtful, it can be scary, intimidating, and maybe a reason also to why more people who look like us don't come, because we don't feel heard, or we feel that we may say something, and people that don't look like us, one of the things that's used quite a bit is they're playing the race card, it's not about race, and when in factuality a lot of it is. So I'm biracial, my mom's white, and my dad's black, and one of the things that I've got to see the beauty of, as I like to say, I got to see the beauty of both sides. I got to see the love from both sides. And so when we talk about experiences, and where I believe you were mentioning, and a couple of other folks were mentioning, is the experience that you all have is going to be different than my experience and people that look like me's experience. And sometimes the first thing that folks want to do is, no, that's not. And when you do that, that's hurting your community, because you're victimizing or you're not believing, and it's hurtful. And so then there's anger, or there's frustration, and or I just want to give up. And then the people do this divide. And so as I sit here and I see some of these things, I've seen that. And it made me question, do I want to read this? Do I not want to read this? But it's very powerful, and I'd like, it's just a quick read, but maybe just to hear it with an open mind and open heart. And thank you very, very much.
And one more thing, state legislators actually just passed $2 million to go into East County to work on prevention and intervention type of work. So those same things that I was talking about as far as things that we need in our Black community to deal with what we're dealing with as far as like the gun violence issue, those are things that East County actually needs to be able to work towards the gun violence issue.
Thank you.
Reads this just honestly, like the snickering and stuff that was going on early, it really offended me as a Black person in this community that like we don't have the same experiences as everyone else in this room. So when she reads this, just read it with an open mind of this is our experiences.
We as BIPOC, even part of the LGBTQ+IA community, we no longer are accepting the discriminatory practices and policies that are commonly used to profile and oppress Black people in our communities. And like I said before anyone gets sensitive or fragile about this, it's our experience. It's not your experience, and it will never be, which is good for folks. But it will never be able to take. You'll never be able to take my experience or that of other BIPOC away, no matter how you try to either politicize it, intimidate, or believe us. Our experience will forever be the reason why we're standing up against institutions that are formed and upheld with racism. Policing started, I don't know if many of you know this, I won't go too much into it, but policing started off as slave catching, and some of those same practices and biases are still in place today. We may not always agree on things, and that's totally fine. But it's hurtful when you try to diminish our experiences. It just proves that racism still exists today. Some people are going to get offended by me talking about racism, and I understand that it can be uncomfortable. I've got, like I said, white mom, white side of the family, Black dad. I'm in these uncomfortable conversations all the time. But if you don't think that racism still exists, then you're part of the problem, I say, and not part of the solution. Educating yourself is extremely important. When we talk about public safety, we should be looking at it equitably, as public safety will look different to me than most of you here. I think of public safety as a proactive prevention work. I look at it as unarmed specialists working with the community, the mentally ill, the houseless. I envision a community that can call upon each other to help guide our youth in the right direction. I understand from education that the more punitive we are as a society, the more violent of a society it creates. When we talk about public safety in schools, if we hear one incident about indecency, abuse of power, including physical, verbal abuse, intimidation, profiling of students, it needs to be addressed at the district level and forwarded to the chief of police. Oftentimes the police union and lieutenant continue to not listen or believe the survivors and or victims. People, and they often attack their character, and I've witnessed this with my own eyes. It's happened to my own family. And they choose to not listen or believe the survivors by attacking the people and their character, whether that's on social media or within the department, school systems. And when they speak up or speak out, they're calling them liars. And it is not restorative or a step in moving forward in reconciliation. It further creates a divide. Once again, be fortunate and happy that it's not your experience, but one experience of somebody else is not yours, but it doesn't mean that it's not happening. And that's it.
And I just want to say that, we started out this conversation talking about this being a safe space. I'm not sure if you guys were in here at that point, but that doesn't end with this meeting. We need to think about that across the community as an ongoing cultural piece of what we value. And, and you mentioned this in what you read. Some of these conversations are hard. Some of them are difficult to navigate in a way without offending one or both sides. And yet, if we don't have the conversations, we run the risk of maintaining the status quo, which I think most would agree has not really been successful heretofore, right? So I certainly appreciate you sharing, both of you, and you guys being here and sharing your perspectives. And just know that, as a profession, law enforcement has a lot of work to do. And there are historical perspectives and lived experiences that a lot of us in this room can't share. No matter how hard we try, we can't empathize, we can't understand. We can only ask you to help us try to see things through the experiences that you've endured. And it's important for us to know that, not only in this moment, but long term. So I'll get off my little soapbox, but I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. And I think you had a question on this comment?
I'm trying to gather myself a little bit, I guess.
Okay. We'll come back.
Just gather myself as I go, which is
okay.
Best. I'm born and raised in Portland and Gresham too. Went to Reynolds High School, grew up in Rockwood, raised by a single mom. I don't know. I don't have much to say that people haven't already said already, but when I think of public safety, I think of a community that is there to take care of me when I'm struggling, And our community is really, really not good at that these days. There's so many people struggling, and I see a lot of hysteria about homeless folks right now, but a lot of us can become homeless at any time. And I've been poor my whole life, like one paycheck away from being homeless, And it's apparent to me throughout my lived experience that, as others have said earlier tonight, the way to create public safety, the way to create safety is by taking care of each other. And the best the police can do ever is respond. And if we're gonna have a conversation about, oh God, there's all this gun violence, the world is falling apart. A lot of us can see that. It's terrible. This world's not, this world's not gonna be any easier to live in, and we're seeing the fractures. And it's only going to get worse. We can look at Portland, that's our future. If we're going to urbanize more, if we're going to continue to be scarce with our resources, with our wealth, and to not help each other out, there's only going to be more homeless people, there's only going to be more people struggling, and we're going to need more cops, because the more people there are struggling, the more people are going to act out. Police can't be the Band-Aid that we rely on. We have to create safety from the ground up. I don't know. I'm only saying things that people have already said, so that's why I almost didn't speak.
So, in some of the things that have been said, I'm going to go back to the fact that police and everyone in the community needs to work together. I get that. But they're taking SRO officers out of schools. And unfortunately, what I see from my experience with my kids being in high school, they had DARE officers, they had the SROs, they had all of that. What that did for my children is it helped them to get to know the police officers and to not be afraid of them and to develop a relationship. And when my daughter was bullied in high school by a parent on Facebook, he took care of it immediately. It was shut down and handled. And I think that we still need to have that resource. That is a direction that I think we need to keep. Because also they get to know them when there's an accident or whatever. My daughter was in a car accident, and the police officer that came was the one that was at the high school, and so he helped her immensely. So the other thing I wanted to say is I feel that I'm going to second what Mark Eisenhower said earlier. We are in a state of emergency here, and there are violent crimes almost daily. A couple of months ago, I ran the figures, and it was every 2.6 days. And since then, I haven't run them again, but it's been way worse. And I don't want to live in Portland. I moved out of 162nd area to get away from this several years ago, and I do feel like it's moving, and I don't want to live here doing this. I have my own business. We fortunately, knock on wood, have not had trouble at our home or our business. There are a lot of houseless, homeless people around, but we call and it's handled immediately. But I just think that we need to really devote the money that we have to our police force and to programs that also, help you. The SRO officer out of Barlow, I just read an article, probably an old article, I don't know. He actually caught 2 children that were stealing like crazy. And he, rather than prosecute them, they went through and helped those boys to take care of the issues. And now they're great kids. So, and not committing crime. So that's what the SROs can do.
I don't want to touch too much on this subject, but as a Gresham High School student who has seen things and heard things that have happened with the SRO that was there, I think it kind of hurts to know that someone who has physically assaulted, verbally assaulted, made comments, inappropriate comments about students' bodies, and has targeted students of color. I think it's important that we know that this person that's working at our school is causing harm to students. So whether they might be doing good to some students, they're causing harm, and we need to acknowledge that and find a better solution. Although that people may say that they've helped students, there's other alternatives that we can help students to stop things like stealing from happening before it actually happens. Have them have mental health counselors and some type of alternative besides having an armed officer in the school that has targeted them and caused harm to many students. So that's all I just want to say about that.
There's some kind of saying that says something like, your actions speak so loudly that I can't hear what you're saying. Unfortunately, I'm hearing from our city leaders, we care about safety, but their actions don't demonstrate that. We can say we're limited on budget, but whatever budget we got, we still can prioritize. And we need to prioritize safety first and foremost of anything. That's what citizens looking for their government to do for them, whether it be on a national level, state level, or local level. Safety's got to be number one, or else we've got nothing else. We've got no diversity or safety or inclusion or whatever else. So the priority's got to be safety. So yeah, if we need more dollars in the budget, let's talk about that. But we do need to count on our city leaders to reprioritize and make sure we're getting additional staff. Patrol officers, first of all, I've been here 60 years and have never had a bad interaction with a Gresham police officer. And I've had many interactions when I'm younger and with my own children or whatever. There's been interactions. I've never had a bad interaction. So I tell you, but we respected them and they were always good. But what I would say, if there are more patrol officers, there's more on hands to deal with the things like this lady was talking about with her next door neighbor harassing her and the other people. It's ridiculous that they're not being responded to, and people are dying. People are literally dying because these officers are not able to get there in time, or not able to respond, they're not answering the 911 calls when we call. And so if there's more out there spread throughout the community, they're better able to respond to the needs. The other thing is about the dangers we're seeing about the crimes being committed. I think most of us know that we have a district attorney in Memo County that is not prosecuting the crime. That's our own fault, right? He said ahead of time that was going to be his position, that he was not going to prosecute crimes. I don't know if there's anything City of Gresham can do to make their feelings known. We need a DA that's going to prosecute crimes, or if we're going to keep complaining about it, then recall him. Whatever we got to do, he's an elected official. We need to hold our district attorney accountable, because if he's not going to prosecute them or throw the repeat victimizers in jail for at least a few days, then he does not belong there. That's all I have to say.
I just wanted to know, I'm just trying to get still really the scope of the types of recommendations that you're doing, is part of the work that you're doing to make recommendations about how the city could fund more police officers, could fund more safety programs. I mean, part of the problem is that we're talking about a lot of different things, and the money for a lot of those things comes from lots of different places. It doesn't come necessarily from the city of Gresham. Like, we used to have the Police Activities League, and I don't know, was that funded by the city or was that funded by the county? I don't even know who funded that before it went away, but that was a great resource. Or Boys and Girls Club and all of those different things. The funding for that doesn't come from the city, but really my question is part of your work to recommend to the city, look, here's how you can free up more money for public safety, whatever the citizens and the city decide that looks like, whether it's more sworn officers, more mental health, more home, however that looks, is part of your work to recommend funding sources and ways to fund that.
The short answer to that is no.
Okay.
Our role is to say, here's what a effective set of resources for public safety look like for your community. This is what best practices in public safety look like from a policy perspective, from a leadership perspective, from an operational perspective. Here's what would be an efficient and effective use and number of resources to do those things in an effective way. And at that point, then the city has to make decisions about, to what extent if in fact those recommendations exceed the current budget, is the city in a position to provide additional resources? And if so, how does that happen? So the short answer is...
So that'll be another study.
Well, but just so we're clear, we don't, our role is to really say, here's what the police department ought to look like to be in alignment with best practice in the industry and efficiently and effectively serve the community. And by the way, and I said this before, but some of those shifts in allocation of resources can free up certain money, right? So for example, if you're hiring, non-sworn personnel, you can usually hire, the cost of one non-sworn personnel is oftentimes about 60% or less of hiring an officer.
Right.
So if there's ways to move those things around, that's something to think about. Yes, ma'am.
So as a City of Gresham employee, I have seen some of our employees in the homeless services folks, code compliance, they have been assaulted, they have been harmed, they've had things thrown at their vehicles by these people committing the crimes. So we need to keep them safe, and I know you're saying let's look at these non-sworn positions. They have to be safe in all of that as well. And that's where we need more police officers to also back them up in those unsafe situations, going along with the DA that actually holds people accountable for their actions.
Yeah, and so please understand that as we talk about this, it's not our intent to suggest that we would compromise safety in any way, shape, or form. There are different ways to do that, and different layers and methodologies that can engage non-sworn folks in roles where they can be safe, and so that's just a bigger part of the conversation. Yes, ma'am.
Regarding the civilian programs, there are a number of civilian programs in the city of Gresham right now. There are a lot of them on hold right now because of COVID, like the CVIC program that goes around the parks and stuff. The other program, Neighbors Helping Neighbors, is on hold. Code Compliance has had their hands tied on certain issues as far as towing, as far as vegetation in the yards, and all the complaints that have come in, and they're starting to get back on track. Their hands are still tied on many issues. And as far as policyholders, holding them accountable, we have to have them all doing what we need to do for the city. Not everybody who's on the council is supportive of the police and fire department and spending money to keep them going and keep them overstaffed instead of understaffed.
Other comments? Yes, ma'am.
Sorry about being late. It was my birthday yesterday. I was at the arcade having fun. So, y'all should go. So, Terry Palmer, and I am the founder of Go Get Your Child Community Violence Prevention. So my son was shot 2015. He lived because of the grace. Oh, come on, I just buried him last month. So I am from this community. I just turned 59. I look good. So I just buried my son last year. But what I'm hearing in here is the same thing I fear for. It's our safety. But throwing them in jail and all that kind of stuff work? No. Gresham, you guys are green out here. What I mean by that is you don't have no programs out here with people like me with lived experiences. I'm 4 generations deep in this community. I know gang members from every corner. They know me. They respect me. So I'm working with Vincent Dixon Jones here to develop some kind of outreach where I got like 5 or 6 big dudes, you know. We gonna, start coming out here, and it's about developing relationships. Y'all talking about this cuff. We cuffing them, and then they coming back out because we don't have room for them. Let's build relationships with them, put people in positions out here that can relate to them, that had drug issues, that are like me. My son was a gang member, he was a blood. So, I know what's going on. They can't lie to me. They probably can lie to you. But I'll be like, come on now, partner. What's going on with that? No, don't come that way. I know how to talk to them. You gotta get people out here to know how to talk to these kids. You understand? We need to go in there. As far as police in the school and all that, listen, I'm gonna tell you, black people are dying at the hands of guns of the police. They're dying. And I don't want my kids going to my grandkids going to no school with the armed officers standing there and they looking at the news and they see people, the police killing us. Come on, baby. We can do better than that. Put us in the schools. I got a program, it's called The Truth About Drugs. We're trying to get into schools. They won't even let us in. But they won't let us in. Then we got a program, The Ways to Happiness, where we can teach these kids about stuff that their parents didn't teach them, morals and respect. Do not murder. Treat your parents. I got all of that. But I ain't got no grant money. Ain't nobody stepped to me. But Vincent Dixon Jones is helping me. You know what? I'm in this community. I've been in this community before they moved all the black people out here. But what I'm saying is we got a problem, period. But locking them up is not going to change it. Get people out here that can walk the walk and talk the talk and handle this. Seriously. Okay?
What we need is the relationship part. Because a lot of what, not very long ago, we had an active shooter at Reynolds. And I know personally from the stories that because an officer was there, that shooter went into a different room instead of a gym. So I think that the police officers that I talk to, they do relate. They want to relate. They want to do everything they can before they put handcuffs on. I think the relationship that we need to have and build is to talk to the kids, get them together so that our officers can be there when they need to be and not do what they don't need to be. But it is building relationships. You are not going to win if it's none or all. There has to be some kind of a mediation and everybody talking, because I really truly believe we all want what's best for every citizen in Gresham. And we do want to hear the lived experiences. Mine is not yours, and honestly, yours is not mine. And we each bring something to the table. We've got to sit down and talk, because we're not going to get here or here. We're only going to get when we do this.
That's right.
So we all have to commit to get into this.
Yes. What I want to say real quickly is that one of the things we talk about that's kind of plagued relationships between the police and communities is something we call fractionalism. And that's the notion that we're the police, you're not. We're the community. Police isn't part of our community. And once upon a time in the history of policing, That didn't used to be the case, right? It used to be more of a symbiotic kind of relationship, at least.
They were slave catchers. Police were slave catchers.
But the bottom line is that it's about us coming together, as you're talking about, with relationships and understanding, and not just a singular perspective, right? Everyone's perspectives.
Yeah, I just want to touch on the fact that everybody want to bring up the Reynolds High School shooting, but not actually remembering that there was a Park Rose High School active shooter that happened too, and there was a black football coach that actually took the weapon from that individual. And another thing is what happened in Oxford. I've been listening to the police chief and doing my studies and research on it. The Oxford police chief actually said that officer was told not to engage with active shooters. SROs are told not to engage with active shooters until they actually have backup. So for everybody's standpoint of saying that we should have police in the schools because of active shooters, that isn't really an argument, because police are actually told to not engage with active shooters until they have backup.
Just so you know, that's not accurate nationally. That person may have had that policy internally, but that is not a national best practice. Just so you know, in fact, we train the contrary. Most police agencies, when they train active shooter, the officer, the preferred is to have backup. But if in the absence of backup, officers in most organizations are encouraged to go and address threat independently. So just so you know, there's a lot of different philosophies, and I'm not discounting what you're saying. I don't know if it's true or not what that person said, but that's not the standard nationally. Just so you know. Yes.
So I don't normally speak at these things, but just a couple thoughts I've had. I grew up East Coast, where you're at. I've lived out here for almost 10 years, Gresham, downtown core. I'm in 162nd area now. So I've seen, all three sections of this. Everything that I've seen does, point to getting to the root cause of what's driving the criminality in the first place, and penny prevention's worth a pound of cure. And, if there's issues of not being able to get funding, maybe communities can do, raising efforts, bonds are maybe a possibility. It seems like, police are usually the after response, not the before response. And if you can keep someone from getting to that point where they're desperate enough or have enough issues that they feel the need to do something that's illegal, then maybe society has failed them in the first place.
Other comments? Anyone else?
Point has been made already, but this meeting is so predictable. Like, if you really wanted to reach out to people of color and to like 4 people, you would have done so, and you didn't, and this is the result. Like, there's so much untapped genius in our community that isn't in this room, and it's being a failure of the process.
Anyone else? So say. Yeah, we're not going to wait until the end of the study. There will be some things that will be happening in the interim. I'm certain of that. So at least I should say we will make some of those recommendations, and they will get advanced, and hopefully something will start working. I want to say thank you to everybody for being here. Thanks for sharing your comments. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming. Have a good night.
And thanks for staying with us for this. I definitely appreciate you spending the time to watch this session. There is going to be another session that they're doing with a virtual setup in the beginning of January. I'm going to work on getting more information on that, get it available to people to be able to tune in to make their voices heard. There is also the SharePoint site that you can leave comments on for the city. And Yeah, I definitely encourage people who live in Gresham, have business with Gresham, visit Gresham, to definitely contribute to this. This is one of those things where I think if everybody works together, hopefully we can make things better for everyone. And I would really hope to be able to see more participation from communities that are traditionally marginalized. But I will definitely be touching on that more on the second half of this series when I do the follow-up video to this in a little while. If you like the work that we do here, definitely feel free to check out the links that we have down in the video description. We do have access to different fund options, as well as our other social media accounts and our website. I definitely invite you to take a look at that, see if there's anything that you're interested in. Like and subscribe to our channel here, and if you know other people that would have an interest in helping to shape the future of public safety politics in Gresham area, definitely share them this video so that they can see what we're starting with. In the meantime, definitely thanks for joining. This is Heather Van Wild signing off.